Imagine this scene. June 4, 1944. The Atlantic Ocean, 150 miles off Cape Blanco, Africa. 58 German submarine crew members surface in the frigid Atlantic waters, arms lifted in surrender, their U-boat damaged and flooding below them. They're drifting in hostile waters, encircled by American naval vessels, anticipating machine gun fire or violent questioning before being killed. They've just become the first enemy naval personnel seized at sea by the U.S. Navy since the War of 1812. But what Captain Daniel Gallery chose to do in that moment would amaze these battle-hardened German sailors, alter naval history permanently, and create one of World War II's most incredible accounts of integrity amid global conflict. This isn't the account you're expecting. Before we get into this classified account, hit subscribe and like the video. And by the conclusion of this story, you'll grasp why one German officer claimed this experience renewed his belief in humanity, even during history's most savage war. To comprehend why this moment was so remarkable, you need to understand what U-boats represented in 1944. The German U-505 had been attacking Allied vessels for 2 years. Every ship she destroyed carried not only military equipment, but correspondence from troops to their families, pictures of kids, medical supplies for combat hospitals, and provisions for hungry civilians in freed territories. When a U-boat attacked, it wasn't simply military tactics, it was individual tragedy multiplied across numerous households. By 1944, undersea warfare had turned vicious beyond comprehension. German U-boats operated under instructions to destroy anything displaying an Allied banner, frequently without advance notice. Allied forces, reciprocally, had embraced a strategy of eliminating U-boats immediately, seldom attempting to save survivors. Both sides had discarded the honorable customs of naval combat. It was within this atmosphere of reciprocal savagery that our account starts. The individual who would transform everything was Captain Daniel Gallery, a Chicago-born Irish-American who planned several steps ahead and wasn't intimidated by breaking regulations. Gallery had grown up in a blue-collar community, where keeping your promises was sacred and treating others properly mattered more than strictly following guidelines. By 1943, Gallery commanded Task Group 22.3, hunting U-boats across the Atlantic with his escort carrier USS Guadalcanal and 5 destroyer escorts. But Gallery was fixated on an impossible goal. He didn't merely want to destroy U-boats, he wanted to seize one undamaged. Not since the War of 1812 had the U.S. Navy seized an enemy warship at sea. His commanding officers thought he'd lost his mind. U-boats were engineered to sink rapidly when damaged, and German personnel had explicit instructions to sabotage their vessels rather than allow enemy capture. Gallery began training his crew regardless. What Gallery couldn't have predicted was that in under 8 months he'd be looking at 58 frightened German sailors floating in the ocean, and the choice he made in that instant would be discussed for the following 80 years. But what Gallery didn't realize was that 3,000 miles distant, a German submarine was going to commit a critical error that would challenge his impossible strategy to the maximum test. And the young German commander committing that error, he was going to discover something about American integrity that would transform his entire life. Meanwhile, U-505 was experiencing the most disastrous patrol of her service. Her former commander had experienced a total mental collapse during a depth-charge bombardment in October 1943. Before his complete crew, Captain Lieutenant Peter Zizek had pulled his sidearm and killed himself rather than endure capture. The devastating event had destroyed crew confidence and left them with a superstitious conviction that their vessel was jinxed. New Commander Harold Lang, at 40 among the most senior U-boat commanders but unfamiliar with U-505, faced tremendous pressure. By June 4, 1944, they'd been deployed 2 months without destroying a single Allied ship. The personnel were worn out, resources were dwindling, and confidence was bottoming out. What Lang didn't realize was that Gallery's task group was pursuing them. On that Sunday morning, Lieutenant William T. Tolan was flying a standard patrol in his Grumman TBF Avenger when something grabbed his attention. At 11:09 a.m., he identified a dark form traveling under the surface. the unmistakable silhouette of a big submarine. What occurred next happened in merely 6 minutes, but concealed in those 6 minutes was a single 7-second choice by a frightened German sailor that would rescue everyone. Its life, though nobody would understand it until considerably later. Toland's depth. Charge strike caught U-505 totally unprepared. The blast damaged the submarine's control surfaces and power system, compelling Lang to make a critical choice: surface right away or risk losing the vessel completely. At 11:15 a.m. U-505 burst to the surface like an injured whale, water cascading from her structure, her diesel motors sputtering to operation as her personnel frantically tried to bring fresh air into the vessel. Gallery, tracking radio communications from the command deck of the Guadalcanal, recognized this was his opportunity. Gallery had moments to choose: follow routine protocol and destroy the submarine with weapons fire, or try something that hadn't succeeded in 132 years. Rather than commanding his vessels to destroy the submarine with artillery, he issued the instruction his personnel had been rehearsing for. "Launch all boats, we're boarding her!" German sailors were streaming out of U-505's tower and leaping into the Atlantic. Some were injured, others petrified, but dense black fumes were billowing from the submarine's structure, obvious proof she was seriously damaged and possibly going to detonate. But here's what neither the Americans nor Germans realized: a single error by one panicked sailor was going to alter everything. Among the German personnel evacuating the vessel was Petty Officer Gottfried Fischer, commanded to activate the sabotage explosives that would sink U-505 to the ocean floor within minutes. But in his terror, Fischer committed a vital mistake. He configured the timer for 7 minutes rather than 30 seconds. This error would rescue everyone. But the Americans climbing aboard U-505 had zero knowledge they were competing against a 7-minute countdown. They believed they had perhaps 30 seconds before the submarine detonated under them. Lieutenant Albert David of the USS Pillsbury was getting ready to command the boarding team onto an enemy submarine. At 23 years old, David understood he was accepting a suicide assignment, boarding a damaged enemy submarine that could detonate any second, possibly facing fire from remaining personnel. With no method of knowing what traps awaited below, David didn't waver. With radioman Stanley Wojciak and signalman Arthur Nispel, he entered a small vessel and neared the smoking U-505. As they climbed aboard, they could detect the threatening ticking of sabotage explosives somewhere below. Water was flooding through opened valves, and electrical blazes were spreading through the command room. David made the choice that would rescue U-505 and possibly the German personnel still floating in the water. Rather than withdrawing, he commanded his crew below decks to locate and neutralize the explosives. Operating by flashlight in the smoke-saturated submarine, David found the primary sabotage valve and shut it, halting the flooding. WWII located the timing device and, with zero training in German explosives, cautiously severed the wires. One incorrect action could have sent them all to the depths. Within 60 minutes, U-505 was stabilized and under tow. But the genuine challenge was only starting, because what Gallery was going to uncover inside that submarine would be more valuable than destroying 100 U-boats, but only if he could resolve an impossible riddle. When David's boarding team descended into U-505's command room, they discovered an intelligence analyst's fantasy. In their terror to evacuate the vessel, the German personnel had abandoned virtually everything: encryption books, navigation maps, technical documents, and most significantly, an Enigma machine still configured with the day's encryption configurations. The intelligence was absolute treasure: codes, navigation maps, and information that would rescue thousands of Allied lives. Technical documents disclosed German advances in torpedo engineering and submarine design. Navigation maps revealed previously undiscovered patrol paths and refueling sites. But all of this would be useless if the Germans discovered that U-505 had been seized. If Berlin learned their encryption was breached, they would instantly modify their complete communication network. Gallery was going to make a choice that would amaze his own personnel almost as much as it amazed the Germans. A choice so exceptional that it would stay classified for generations, not because it was merciless, but because it was too compassionate for wartime. This generated an unprecedented challenge. How do you conceal the seizure of a 252-foot submarine and 58 prisoners of war? While his boarding team controlled U-505, Gallery confronted an equally complicated challenge. What to do with 58 German sailors who had just witnessed their submarine seized undamaged? Routine protocol was obvious. Question the prisoners, then transport them to POW facilities. But Gallery understood that following protocol would jeopardize the remarkable intelligence opportunity they had just secured. The German personnel floating in the Atlantic waves anticipated death. Captain Lieutenant Lange later documented that he felt confident he and his personnel would be killed. Accounts of submarine crews being murdered rather than saved were widespread on both sides. But as American vessels neared to save the German survivors, something unprecedented occurred. Rather than rough treatment or instant questioning, the German sailors were lifted aboard American ships and instantly given medical care, dry clothing, and warm meals. Gallery had made a choice that contradicted generations of naval warfare tradition. He would handle the German prisoners not as conquered adversaries, but as fellow mariners who had battled honorably and merited regard. This wasn't emotion, it was masterful strategy. Well-handled prisoners were more inclined to assist, less inclined to try escape, and more inclined to preserve the complete secrecy the intelligence mission demanded. When Lange was brought aboard the USS Guadalcanal, he anticipated harsh questioning in confined spaces. Instead, he encountered what he later characterized as unexpected American civility. Gallery personally spoke with the senior German officers and clarified the circumstances. Their submarine had been seized lawfully. They were now prisoners, but would be handled with military respect. Because of intelligence needs, they would require separation from other German prisoners. What Gallery didn't reveal to them was that their temporary separation would continue for the war's duration. But the genuine challenge wasn't seizing the submarine. It was what followed next. Gallery's answer was as daring as seizing U-505 itself. Collaborating with naval intelligence, he organized for the German personnel to be secretly moved to a specially arranged facility at Camp Ruston, Louisiana, where they would be maintained in total separation from the external world. The German personnel was moved in small batches, blindfolded and under surveillance, with fabricated stories prepared. According to official documentation, these prisoners had been seized in North Africa and needed special treatment because of their understanding of classified technology. What the Germans encountered at Camp Ruston amazed them more than their handling aboard the American ships. Rather than severe prison circumstances, they were accommodated in sanitary barracks, supplied with consistent meals that were frequently superior to what American troops were consuming overseas, and permitted recreational pursuits. Gallery's instructions were explicit. The U-505 personnel was to be handled as professional military prisoners, not lawbreakers. They would labor for compensation, obtain correspondence privileges, and preserve military organization within their own hierarchy. This wasn't merely humanitarian, it was tactically critical. Well-handled prisoners were considerably less inclined to try escape, which could jeopardize the complete mission. Furthermore, intelligence analysts discovered that the Germans' appreciation made them remarkably willing to share technical knowledge. The contradiction wasn't missed by anyone. German submarine personnel, depicted in Allied publicity as ruthless murderers, were demonstrating to be professional mariners who responded to professional handling with professional conduct. While the U-505 personnel adjusted to their unusual new existence in Louisiana, the intelligence from their submarine was already transforming the conflict. The Enigma device and encryption books supplied Allied codebreakers with extraordinary understanding into German naval transmissions, contributing to rescue hundreds of Allied vessels and thousands of lives. Technical intelligence disclosed German improvements that were instantly distributed with Allied engineers. The comprehensive navigation maps helped convoy coordinators direct shipping away from German submarine groupings. But Gallery's most important achievement may have been demonstrating that handling enemy prisoners with respect wasn't merely morally correct, it was tactically intelligent. His method became a template for prisoner operations throughout the war's remainder. News of Gallery's achievement circulated quietly through intelligence networks. Other commanders started embracing comparable methods with seized personnel, with reliably favorable outcomes, superior intelligence, fewer escape efforts, and fewer security challenges. Gallery's choice had significant individual effects too. American mariners who participated in the seizure later stated it was the most significant experience of their naval duty, not because they seized an enemy ship, but because they had demonstrated humanity amid conflict. For the German personnel, the experience was similarly life-changing. Individuals indoctrinated to view Americans as savage adversaries uncovered their captors were professional mariners much like themselves, capable of both military capability and individual integrity. The confidential information of U-505 seizure was preserved throughout the conflict and for multiple years subsequently. The German personnel was ultimately freed and returned to Germany in 1946, more than 2 years following their seizure. When the former prisoners returned to Germany, they encountered a nation devastated and attempting to reconstruct. Numerous of their fellow U-boat colleagues hadn't lived. German submarine duty had among the most extreme fatality proportions of any military division, with more than 75% of personnel killed in battle. The personnel's accounts of their handling initially encountered doubt from other German colleagues. But as information surfaced, the U-505 experience became a compelling demonstration of how adversaries could handle each other with integrity, even in global conflict. Captain Gallery demonstrated that even in humanity's bleakest moments, people could select respect over savagery. Harold Lang, the young commander who anticipated execution. That June morning lived until 2003, regularly speaking about the regard he obtained from his American captors. Lang frequently stated that Gallery's choice had renewed his confidence that decency could endure even in global conflict. Consider this for a moment. These German mariners anticipated death. Instead, they experienced something that made them challenge everything they'd been taught about their American adversaries. The U-505 personnel demonstrated remarkably cooperative during their confinement at Camp Ruston, proof of how respectful handling can convert adversaries into partners. Years afterward, Harold Lang reflected that the respectful handling made cooperation feel like the honorable decision rather than disloyalty. And here's something extraordinary. When U-505 was relocated to the Chicago Museum in 1954, German U-boat colleagues who had relocated to America volunteered to assist preserve their former adversary. These individuals, who once battled against Allied vessels, labored alongside American colleagues to guarantee this account of integrity in warfare would never be overlooked. The seizure of U-505 reminds us that the greatest generation wasn't merely great because they prevailed in World War II. They were great because of how they selected to wage it. When Captain Daniel Gallery had the chance to follow the savage precedent of submarine warfare, he selected instead to follow his moral compass and his sense of integrity. Gallery could have destroyed U-505 and abandoned her personnel to perish. He could have seized them and subjected them to severe imprisonment. Military requirement and wartime animosity would have validated either decision. Instead, he selected a third option, one that demanded more bravery, more command, and more confidence in decency than simply following instructions ever would have. Gallery's choice didn't merely rescue 58 German lives or supply valuable intelligence. It proved that triumph accomplished through integrity is more significant than triumph accomplished through savagery. It demonstrated that even in humanity's bleakest moments, people can make decisions that respect our better nature. If your relatives have accounts from World War II about instances when integrity prevailed over animosity, when adversaries selected humanity over vengeance, or when regular people made remarkable moral decisions, post them in the comments below. These accounts matter because they remind us that the ability for decency isn't restricted to any single nation or era. It exists wherever people select to view their adversaries not as creatures, but as fellow people meriting respect, even amid the most horrific conflict in human history.